Hi, my name's Laura. You might know me from equitying, one of many competitions that I've done. Um, but I wanted to provide a document that supports people who are new going into being equity officers to give them like the lowdown on what to expect. So I'm by no means an expert at equity, and there are many people more experienced than me. But I've kind of learned a lot of stuff by osmosis that I want to share to support people going into it as well. So I've previously been equity officer for 16 other competitions, and I am also a teacher. So I do this in my job as well. And I just want to share what works for me. It might not work for everyone, but this is what works for me. And hopefully it can help people who are new going into this. So firstly, requirements for being an equity officer. Firstly, be nice, be approachable. You need to be someone that people feel comfortable talking to and sharing any issues that they have with you. Secondly, it's really important not to react when people tell you personal information. Maintaining confidentiality is really important, especially in an instance of clashes, for instance, or when people make equity violations. Again, you need to be self-assured and trust your judgment on whether you think motions may cause particular issues, for instance. I know it's hard to say to CAs that you don't think a certain motion should be set, but if you feel particularly uncomfortable and you don't feel comfortable standing behind a motion, it's important for you to stay true to what you feel in that moment there and ask them to change the motion, for instance. Lastly, a lot of people think that you need to be a good judge to be an equity officer. You don't need to be a good judge. You don't even need to judge the competition. In fact, not judging the competition allows you to be present during the rounds so that people can come and find you if they've got any issues or they have like a space or someone to talk to for whatever reason. So what does the role essentially entail? So essentially the role encompasses ensuring the well-being of participants at any competition. So this involves monitoring and working with TAB to ensure clash is accounted for. We'll get on to clash in a second. Monitoring, responding and preempting equity issues that may arise during a round, and being available to give support to participants who may need it. So if someone's feeling particularly anxious, just providing a space for them to feel comfortable in. So a lot of these issues, if they like, you don't need to solve these things yourself. You just need to provide that space and a listening ear for people. It's not on you to give first aid training. It's not on you to like solve or be the hero in certain circumstances. You are just there to provide that space away from the stress of a competition for people. So for instances, you should know when you need to contact external bodies, for instance. We'll get on to that a bit later as well. So what do you need to do before you act as an equity officer? Firstly, you need to make your equity briefing. I'm going to input the usual equity briefing that I have here. Again, I've highlighted whether it's for in-person or online debating with each slide. So that should help you know which slides to use there, and you can take all of it if you want to for your briefing. Secondly, you need to write an equity document. So I've not included anything of this here, but a few things to note here. Firstly, you need to read it fully beforehand, ensure that your equity policy matches up with it and make any changes you need to there. Secondly, you need to make sure that the clash policy matches what you have for the competition and the opt-out policy matches what you have. Lastly, you need to change the name of the competitions and the name of the equity officer and the details within the document. Fully reading through, you should be able to do it there. Again, you need to fully credit the people who have originally written the document. That's really important there. But if it's not broke, don't fix it. It takes ages to write these things, and you don't need to do that if someone's already done it before. Shout out to Lindsay Kerr for her equity document that I have used many a time, and it works perfectly. So lastly, you need to make a clash form. Again, I'm going to go right onto that one. To save yourself time towards the end of this, do not leave this to last minute, please. You need to leave participants time to be able to look through participants list and make any clashes that they need to and read the document themselves. So leaving it to last minute will just cause a lot of stress for the competition organisers. So getting on to clash. What is clash? So essentially clash allows judges and speakers to clash each other. So judges can clash other judges and speakers can clash judges as well. They may do this for a variety of reasons if they feel that they are not comfortable being judged by someone, or they do not feel that they could fairly be judged someone or fairly judge someone for whatever reason. Speakers generally cannot clash each other. However, in extremely rare circumstances, to ensure the well-being of participants, this has been allowed before. If this is the case, you need to clarify with the CA, like the CA team, to make sure that they are aware of that this is happening. This should only be used in extreme circumstances, as it can really disrupt the running of the competition and the pairing of rooms, etc. So in that case, it has to be an extremely hard clash there. The most important part of any clash process is to keep it all confidential. So the equity officer may be the only person aware of what participants are clashing each other. However, often the tab will know as well, and when the tab has access to that document as well, it makes running of the competition a lot smoother, especially if people input last-minute clashes. However, if this is the case, it's really important that participants know that the tab officer can also see who has input clash in for who. If, as an equity officer as well, you should also make speakers aware that they can contact you if they have any clash that they don't want tab to know about, and you can double check the rounds with tab to make sure that that clash isn't present there as well. So what types of clash that we have? So different types of clash can help us assess whether it can be waived in certain circumstances for a variety of reasons. Firstly, soft clash is clash that may be waived in certain circumstances. For instance, if the participants attend the same institution, or a really common one that's quite cringy to say, but if people have hooked up before and they do feel comfortable judging each other in very certain circumstances, that can be waived. Again, hard clash is clash that cannot be waived in certain circumstances. This can be for whatever reason. However, it just means that the mental well-being of participants would be significantly harmed from being judged by or judging with another participant. As an equity officer, it's important that you clarify the kinds of clash in certain circumstances so you know whether it can be waived or not. So for in-rounds, the tab should just alert the CAs whether a clash has been breached. The CAs will not know who has clashed who, but they will just know that the draw wasn't working and will need to reassess that. For out-rounds, however, the CAs may need to know about the nature of a certain clash. So as an equity officer, you will know who has clashed who, so you can speak to those people and ask whether it's a soft or a hard clash. And in those cases, generally you can go to the CAs and tell them that it's allowed. However, sometimes if it's a hard clash, the CAs will need to know who has clashed who, just tell ask the participants whether they feel comfortable revealing who has made the clash and whether the CAs can know that. This is where it can get a little bit complicated, but generally just making sure participants are aware of what information you're sharing and what information you are keeping confidential. There is no reason the CA should know anything beyond whether it's a hard or soft clash, however, so most of this should be kept confidential. Again, it's up to the person who input the clash to disclose as much or as little information to you as they wish. So this is just an example of a clash form that I generally use. You can steal this word for word, I don't mind. Sometimes people add in reason for clash. However, if you do this, I would not mark it with the must add symbol, the asterisk there, because I think participants should reserve the right to keep as much privacy as they want on those issues there. Knowing the reason for it can be really helpful in determining whether it can be waived or not. But again, it's up to the participants to share as much or little as they wish to there. So again, this is going to sound like my usual equity briefings. What are equity violations? An equity violation is any behaviour that makes a participant uncomfortable. This may include a lovely list of stuff. So firstly, not respecting the gender pronoun policy. There's kind of two scenarios where this is the case. Firstly, there is non-intentional accidental misgendering. So in most cases, the participants will just apologise and self-correct when it's called out there. This is more of a minor equity breach as it is non-intended. However, the person should respond in the correct manner there by just apologising and self-correcting and not making the same mistake again. Secondly, there is purposeful misgendering. This is a much, much more severe equity violation, and I usually highlight it as a red line in my equity briefings that will cause participants to be removed from the competition at all. Removed from the competition. Again, hostility towards judges if speakers do not get the call they want. I'd say this is more of a, depending on like, obviously it depends on the context and the situation. So this could be minor, could be more severe, depending on what was said or how they said it, or whether they were aware of what they were doing there. Bullying, unwanted sexual advances, belittling other teams in your speeches after a round. There are many, many more things that can count as equity violations, but these are generally more common ones. So for the equity policy, this is just the one that works for me. So many people have different equity policies. I like to have a free strike policy. It just works nicely for what I do. So the free strike policy removes teams from the competition if they make 3 minor equity violations. I have never had to implement this in all of my time being equity officer, but it really helps to have, because it ensures that people who are repeatedly not learning from their mistakes are not continuing to make people uncomfortable at the competition and are not getting away with it. However, I also state that I reserve the right to remove a team's ability to break or remove a team from a competition if an equity violation was egregious enough to warrant it. So that allows me to remove teams who have been particularly offensive and purposefully so as well. So how should you deal with an equity complaint as an equity officer? So firstly, I just check on the mental well-being of the participant who made the complaint, just check that they are okay as well, just check that they are comfortable talking about it. Secondly, and this is for less egregious violations, I offer the following. So firstly, the person who made the complaint can approach the person who offended them themselves and explains what it was that caused the offence. Generally, the person who caused the offence will just apologise and self-correct in the future. I also state that I can be present for this if they want support, so they can do the talking, but I will just be present there if they want a second person because they don't feel comfortable doing it alone. Secondly, I can approach the person myself who made the violation and explained what caused the offence. I can keep the person who caused the offence, no, the person who made the complaint anonymous and just explain what they did, like what the person who made the violation did, or I can say who made the complaint so that the person who caused the violation can apologise. This just gives participants the ability to choose what's right for them, whether they want to address it themselves or whether they would rather I address it myself. As well, I forgot to put for 2, I can also do the talking and explain to the person what happened whilst the person who made the complaint is present and they can apologise there. So it depends on the context of the situation, but having a choice of what can happen after a complaint is made can really help participants feel secure and choose what's needed for them at that time. Again, with a lot of the stuff that encompasses equity, I'm sorry, I'm gonna give a content warning for sexual assault here. A lot of the content that you have to talk about can be quite triggering, so just stop watching if you feel particularly uncomfortable with this. So how do you deal with more egregious issues? So more egregious issues range from sexual assault to intentionally saying highly offensive things. So firstly, investigate the issue to understand the nature and context. So speak to the judges, speak to the speakers, make sure that you are clear on what was said and how it was said as well. And make sure that you are clear on whether it's egregious enough to warrant the removal from the competition. At the start of the competition, I myself make it clear to participants that intentional misgendering is a red line. So make it clear to them when you do your briefing what the red lines are and that they will be removed for that. In certain circumstances, such as sexual assault, you should contact the relevant external bodies. It is not on you to solve this, just provide support until the relevant bodies arrive. As well as an equity officer, you reserve the right to check motions beforehand. I always forget that I have the right to check the motions beforehand. However, it's really useful to remember because it allows you to preempt certain issues that may arise. And seeing as you're an equity violation, you have to stand behind the motions. It's probably in your interest to check that you know what's coming up, and you can say to the CA teams if you feel like one of them is not appropriate. One of the mistakes people often make is they think that if an inequitable case can be run, the motion shouldn't be set. Just because inequitable cases can be ran, it doesn't mean that the motion shouldn't be said. So just be careful that you're not being overly cautious there, because I think that there's a lot of important debates that can be had around sensitive topics, for instance, that can be done in very respectful ways. However, this is where the next bit comes into. Judge based on the demographic of the competition whether speakers will be able to handle the motion. For instance, it's probably best to avoid setting an Israel motion at a novice competition. So make sure you're aware of the demographic, their level of speaking, and whether you feel comfortable giving a emotionally charged, for instance, topic to that demographic of speakers. Generally, the more experienced speakers will be able to better handle motions that are more sensitive, for instance. Again, this is what the CA team should be aware of. However, if you still feel uncomfortable standing behind a motion on equity grounds, you can ask for it to be changed, and the CA team should respect you and do that. Again, if you preempt issues, so for instance, if I know a sensitive motion is coming up, you can preempt it and just do a speech beforehand saying that you need to be careful in the way that you speak about this, avoid making certain triggering arguments, they are unconvincing, whatever, so that people are aware of what kind of cases to avoid making, for instance. So general notes on equity, I wasn't really sure what to headline this. You need to provide your contact details so you are reachable throughout the competition. I usually provide my phone number and Facebook name if people need me there. Again, most competitions should have an equity room unless there's a space where participants can go if they need space and where you can conduct private conversations. As well, all comms should consider accessibility, for instance. However, if you spot that they may have had some blind sites, again, it's not their intention, they're working really hard, but it's really helpful that you voice things if you notice it. So for instance, if the social venue isn't accessible, feel free to let Allcom know, and they should be able to resolve those issues there. Again, being an equity officer shouldn't come at the expense of your own well-being. If participants are rude to you, you don't have to tolerate this. Speak to the CA team. Depending on the extent of the rudeness, you can remove them from the competition. It's not right if they are being aggressive or hostile towards you. So this is just an example equity briefing that I literally always use. I've also highlighted in the corner whether I would use it for online or in person, or online and in person, in case you need help there. You can take as much or as little of this as you want. This is just what I usually do at competitions. So this is just my usual side. What is equity? Blah, blah, blah. Make sure to pause the video and take notes if you want to for what you want for yours. Secondly, I highlight what an equity violation is and what I expect for participants in the way that they interact with each other. Again, I use this for online and in person. What to do in the event of an equity violation. I highlight what my equity policy is. I explain what to do if you believe you have committed an equity violation. Secondly, behaviour outside the debates. So this is the one that I would use for in person because it uses more like socials, and it has more socials and alcohol and talks about crash, for instance. So I would use this one more for in person. For online, I talk more about online behaviour, so such as messaging each other in between the round and how people should be expected to use technology throughout the competition. Lastly, I highlight the gender pronoun policy I have in place. Again, this is online or in person. For online competitions, I would highlight that speakers should not introduce their partners because it's also a way for checking tech issues as well. Lastly, I have the opt-out policy. Again, this is online in person. So generally, I have never sorted out opt-out policy on my own. I always go through the CAs first. So just clarify the opt-out policies with the CAs first and then edit it in your documents. Lastly, I provide my name and contact details, all of that lovely stuff. And I just make a note that I'm not just here if equity violations occur, I'm also here if people just need support for whatever reason. So I really hope that this has helped people who need it. you can literally contact me on Facebook if you need any help there as well. I am also, so I equity a lot. I'm also happy to take on people who have never equitied before if they want someone to support them do it. So yeah, hope this has helped.